My name is Alan Rutherford and I'm the host of Artist to Artist, which is a mini ad hoc series that explores themes and currents in contemporary art practice. In this series I invite an artist or curator along to discuss their work, and our conversation is very informal. In this second instalment I have the pleasure of speaking with the Irish performance artist Rachel Macmanus. During the session we talk about influences, approaches, themes, important pieces of work and plans for the future. I do hope that you enjoy watching this video, and please check back in the future for more instalments of Artist to Artist. Good morning, my name is Alan Rutherford. I'm an artist based in Glasgow, and I'm continuing a little mini-series that I'm doing called Artist to Artist, where I meet with another artist and we discuss the artwork that the artist has produced to date. And this is the second in the series. The first that we did in the series was back in February last year with Ian Wieczorek, who is an Irish painter. And we did this one back in February last year. It was deep in the middle of the COVID pandemic where we were locked down. So this one we are now in the end of April 2022, just going into May obviously, and things are back to normal. You know, lockdowns are released, although we're still doing the meeting via Zoom because Rachel's in Ireland, who's my guest this morning, Rachel Macmanus. Hi Rachel.
Hi Alan.
Hi. So Rachel is over in Ireland in County Clare, and I'm here in Glasgow, and it's a bright, lovely sunny morning, I have to say. So it's all good, and the weather is befitting of hopefully a nice interview, artist to artist discussion that we're going to do over the next hour. Okay, so as I said, my name's Alan Rutherford. I'll be your the host for the next hour. Discussing Rachel's work. Rachel is a visual artist based in County Clare in Ireland, and she works in drawing and performance. Her drawing takes the form of a community-based collaborative practice which allows an ongoing exploration into the cultural and social nuances of her surroundings. Rachel's performance practice is shaped by her prior career as a physical fitness instructor. She employs endurance-based tasks and repetitive action as a way to experience how it feels to present art in a space. Rachel holds a Master's in Fine Art from the Open College of Arts, University Creative Arts 2019, a BA in Visual Communications from the National College of Art and Design, which was gained in 1997. Rachel has exhibited and performed nationally and internationally, including at 126 Artist Run Gallery in Galway, Glore, County Clare, PS2 Studios, Belfast, Revision Festival, Belfast, Fix 21, Catalyst Arts, Belfast, Die Finden Gallery, Linz, Austria, and the Music House It in Galva, Sweden. I hope I did get those pronunciations relatively close. Her recent projects include Eggs and Butter, a show bringing together 3 female artists in Glore, which was held November 21 to January 22, and Behind Closed Doors, Hidden Truths, Clare Haven Services, Ennis, October 21 to January 22, which was a multimedia installation highlighting domestic abuse in Ireland today. Currently, Rachel is completing artisan school residencies in 4 local schools in Clare, working on an upcoming drawing group show, and as of 2021, a recipient of the Arts Council of Ireland Agility Awards, and is now developing a triptych of site-specific durational performance works. So, good morning, Rachel Macmanus. Just to
Good morning, Alan.
Yep, once again, just to enlighten the viewer of our relationship. We actually studied together on the aforementioned MA course from 2016 to 19. We did some some collaborations during the course, and found that we kind of both had a strong interest in arts, visual culture, performance, and since then we have made a few other collaborations, such as I participated in your collaborative drawing project. We exhibited together with this gallery. We took part in the Lanzarote Arts Festival, and more recently we were both in the Ad Spatium exhibition in Sweden, which was organised by one of our fellow MA students, Martin Tollin. Okay, so in terms of my own interest and my own introduction of, in terms of introducing myself and my understanding and my background, which might help to set the scene, for this discussion. For myself, my interest and experience in performance arts actually began quite far back, the mid-1990s, when I was a student at the Glasgow School of Art. The first performance I actually ever attended was at the Contemporary Centre for Arts in Glasgow, and it was by Janine Antoni, who's an American performer, I think. And she was doing a live performance, and it was like big lumps of lard and chocolate, and she was biting out of them, and that was really my first exposure. And before then, I didn't know much about performance. I hadn't had much exposure to it. And then later on, during the semesters, I attended a talk by Marina Abramovich. Because I arrived slightly late at the lecture, I actually had to sit, pretty much down the front row, just in front of the lectern. So it was a transfixing experience, and it made a really big impression, actually, being in front of her and just watching her facial expressions and her animation and actually talking about her work. There were some other talks by performance artist Sterlach, who explored the theme of man-machine and fusing the body with machinery, which became very interesting to me as well. And those were really like my formative experiences, which led me to actually experimenting, with performance in my final year of the undergraduate, which I did do some performances. So that's Rachel Macmanus. That's my understanding, my background, in a nutshell, basically, of my relationship. So what I'd like to now ask you: how did you develop an interest in performance art? When did you first encounter it? What attracts you to performance art?
Okay, Alan. Well, I mean, I have a more, in some ways, more of a direct route, in that I started making it before I kind of knew what it was, if you know what I mean. I was first formally, like, I spent, when I went into our master's program together, I had little performance art was, to be perfectly honest, in 2016. And it was through the interactions with our tutors and observations that came back from the work I was producing in the first year, where they basically said, well, you're making performance art. And I did not know that, and hence my journey into understanding and learning about and reading about performance artists began from there. And I suppose to backtrack from there, I had spent the previous 14 years, as you mentioned in the introduction, working in the fitness industry, and I went into that in my mid-20s. I graduated from my degree in visual communications, and then I just kind of fuddled around for a few years doing a bit of graphic design, not very well, I may add, and worked in bars and did early 20s kind of thing. Then I went to New York for a few years, and when I came home, I retrained as a fitness instructor. I came home post 9/11, just after 9/11, and it was a seismic time, I would say. And I decided I was going to follow this idea I'd always had of an interest I'd always had in physicality. And I dived in there and had always intended to work part-time in that and continue working in design and illustration. And that I ended up working full-time, fully immersed into the fitness industry. And I worked in every facet of the industry. I worked as a personal trainer. I had my own strength training gym for a few years towards the end of that time. I trained trainers. I was very interested in competitive lifting. But the whole time I was daily standing in front of people, teaching or instructing them, and using my own body as the tool to get the work done. So you had to show up, regardless of what mood you were in or how you were feeling. You had to show up and work. And the hours would have been early morning, late night, long hours. And given the nature of the job, you have to be there physically. You can't. Now, I don't know how people, I'd imagine in COVID, a lot of people's work went online. But at the time when I worked in the industry, I was always there in the space working. And I became very accustomed and very good at using my own body and to get the job done. I would either be teaching and demonstrating, or I'd be maybe doing part of the class with them, or generally if I had to show someone an exercise, I would do the exercise, or if I had to spot someone, I hand them a weight. So it was a very physical job, very physical job. And that physicality came to an end when I moved from where I had been living in Cork to County Clare and started my degree. I started my master's with yourself, and had decided I was going to stop teaching and working in the fitness industry because I wanted to focus on this master's program. And I had no outlet for that enormous level of physicality that I had up until then exercised on a daily basis. So I think in retrospect, what happened was I started to find avenues within which I could allow that physicality to exist within. So I started making physical action-based pieces of art, and then was informed by the tutorial staff that what I was doing was a form of performance art. At which point then I went away and investigated further into what this was, and so kind of I sort of went about it in the opposite way, because I didn't really know what it was, and I found out that this was an area that this could be a label which could be applied to what I was tentatively making steps into at that time in 2016, 2017. So that was my initial foray into it. And I suppose there are like performance, like any other form of art, there's every spectrum of type of performance. And in particular, I was drawn towards artists who used their bodies in a physical way to make their artistic statement, as it was. So that was the kind of work I ended up finding myself researching and watching and trying to understand. So there you go.
Fantastic. Excuse me, frog in my throat. I do appreciate that answer. That's quite interesting. That in terms of your personal background, in terms of sharing your own journey, that you did have a previous career, a previous job prior to art, and the commitment that you showed in terms of changing and dropping that in terms of moving to want to do art. It's a massive commitment, and it's quite interesting because it is like obviously you talk about energy and intensity, and finding something to channel that, and the body, and it's something that we'll definitely talk about in a minute, in specific reference to some work. So we talked about your journey, your pathway in terms of finding your way, and it's often quite an intricate network that you have to try and find your way through, in terms of exploring all the different avenues. And as you said, there's not an immediate realization, that you're actually within this genre, so to speak. Perhaps that's probably maybe a good thing, because it means that it's not like you're not trying to calculate, think it out too much. There is a spontaneity to it, and just driven by curiosity in terms of following that pathway. I
think you're right. I have to just say, I think I might have been too intimidated to even. I think at the time I would have been too encumbered by my preconceptions of what it should be, and I might have been too intimidated by those preconceptions to even start if I'd known what I was doing. Yeah. So that's a good point.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the same with every artist. I think if you sit and think about it too much, it can just paralyze you. It can just kill you on the spot and freeze you with fear. You don't actually end up doing anything, So it's
yes. Very much.
I'm just interested in, it seems over in Ireland there is a very active performance scene in Ireland, and we talked about exposure, influences, awareness. How much do you know now about the performance scene in Ireland, and is it active? Has it always? Well, I said it was active, but has it always really been active? And are there any particular Irish performance artists that you found have come into your sphere of focus and influence that you have influenced your work?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's a very flourishing performance scene here, and there are pockets of activity in particular areas, driven by collectives of individuals who reside in those areas. And I mean, I think when I found that I had to actively seek out other artists, because I had, when I embarked upon the masters, I had moved to a new area and I didn't know many people at all. I certainly knew no artists at all. And my masters, as you know, our masters was conducted remotely. So I was logging on to meet my cohort and to meet my tutors. And any chance of a physical, real life cohort or collective of people, that wasn't going to happen because everything we did was remotely. So for me to go and, my tutors would say to me, oh, you need to go and form a collective. And I'd be like, well, how? I don't know anyone. It's not easy to go and just form a collective out of ether. It's not possible to. I also have, I have other commitments. I have 3 children, and I'm a carer to one of my children who has, I suppose you'd label it a disability. So I have a lot of other time commitments, which means that, well, actually, it's probably to my advantage because I have become about 500% more productive in the time that I have to make art. And there's a lot less procrastination than there used to be, because I do all my procrastinating and all my thinking when I am involved in the aforementioned work. And then I do my art making in the slots that I have in a much more productive manner than might have happened 20 years ago. So in some ways, that's to my advantage to have less time. However, in terms of getting to know the performance scene in Ireland, I still don't know it that well. I have a lot more knowledge and experience of it now than I did even, let's say, since I graduated in 2019. But it started with me making work myself and putting it out there and applying for open calls and applying for opportunities and meeting people on a gradual basis that way. And I have been fortunate enough to do a number of projects in Belfast. And through those opportunities, I've come to know quite a lot of incredible artists in Belfast. And the Belfast scene is nothing short of amazing. It's concentrated, it's bursting with creativity, and it's warm and supportive, and it's a wonderful place. I count myself lucky every time I go up there to make work. And I've been fortunate enough to do a number of projects semi-recently there. And outside of there, I'm currently in the process of taking steps towards setting up a collective of like-minded creative individuals where I live here. And that's a slower process. I have a couple of people who I have been meeting with, and it's very encouraging, because before then, where I live here in Clare is a very strong, very rooted, very fully formed traditional music scene. That's huge. Performance art, not so much. I would always have made the joke up until recently, like from Little Britain, that I am the only performance artist in the village here. Again, that can be freeing in some ways, but it's also pretty isolating, and it would be lovely to have people to go and have a coffee with and have a chat about these things. There are other visual artists and some great artists who I've had the fortune to meet. Dublin has a good scene as well, and Limerick was where I got a lot of help and support from applying for opportunities to make live durational art pieces with collective there, which was called Evil Collective, which I think is in a sort of a transitional phase of perhaps will exist again in some form. Some of the original founding members, I think, are considering bringing it back. But that was a wonderful experience for me, because it was the first time I had a foray into audience-based live performance. And I worked with Evil on a number of 2 or 3 times, I think it was, when I would go and make a live piece in front of an audience under their umbrella. And both terrifying and wonderful experience, and relatively close by me, only sort of like a short drive, about a 35-40 minute drive, allowing me to get there and back, because all of my work is based on how far away is it, can I get there, have I got enough time to do it, can I organize things from home to allow me to be away, and so on and so forth. So a lot of residencies, for instance, that I would love to apply for are not within my, are not possible for me, because I can't be away from home for long periods due to my role as a carer. So yeah, those were my first forays in. So I have gradually met a number of our performance artists, and ones who I enjoy the work, whose I enjoy. Well, there's any number of. I mean, Anya Phillips is a performance artist well established in Ireland, and she has made some work that I was very taken by and influenced by, in terms of she's made work to camera, which she's also performed live. Amanda Coogan is obviously probably one of the most well-known Irish performers, as well as Anya Phillips. They're both sort of figureheads, almost, I would say, in for Irish performance art. Other artists whose work I hugely admire. There's an artist in Northern Ireland called Emma Brennan, who's a very prolific artist, and I have seen her perform live, which is an incredible experience. Be Beyond in Belfast are a really well-established cohort of artists who have been making work for years, and I've been lucky enough to see some of their work as well. I mean, again, 3 years ago, I probably wouldn't have known much about any of these people, and I've been fortunate enough to gradually build up a knowledge of, and in a lot of cases, actually get to meet these artists as well. So that's hugely helped me.
Yeah, that's a fantastic, quick tour around, the current contemporary performance scene in Ireland, and of course, going over to Belfast also. I've actually visited Belfast, and I did do a call into the Catalyst gallery, and also the Golden Thread gallery, which Two fantastic galleries, and that was like a lot of names there, Rachel, that you mentioned, and I'm sure that our viewers and also myself will be gladly checking those names out to get more information. Thank you very much for setting the scene on the Irish performance scene. Like I said, I personally have been amazed how busy and how active it appears to be. It just seems like, everything's going on, and it's like so many creative, talented people. I'd just like to, go back to, in terms of like, the theme of your work and where you draw your theme from. You already mentioned about, the repetition, and I do recall that, from when we were studying and discussions, that you were very interested in the seemingly futile act of repetition, and how this can stem from activities such as physical exercise, or that is perhaps required to maintain a particularly bodily look and feel. You captured in this in your work Ode to Sisyphus, the tire flip 2019, and also you did a repetitive performance work called Pack Unpack 2019 at Shannon Airport. So I know that you mentioned about repetition, and back when we were students, you were really kind of focused on this, and I'll just be interested to know how this still informs your performance work. Does it still inform it? Is it still a main thematic concern, and is it something that you're still exploring and looking to explore in the future with the work?
Yeah, good question. I mean, it comes down to, I was applying for I was putting a proposal together for a project there the other day, and I was looking at my artist statement, and I always think, like, I'm always looking at I hate writing artist statements, as many artists do, but I always look to see how relevant is that statement as to what I'm doing at the moment, and does it need to be updated to make it more relevant in terms of what I'm currently working on. And as you know, your focus can shift and change over time with the work you're doing. But one thing that has stayed relevant and constant in mine is this unending obsession with repetitive action that I do have. Hence why that line is still in my statement about how it feels to be present in a space and conducting or performing an action over and over. I suppose I do not ever take for granted the experience of being in a body. And I know that sounds quite in some ways, but it's literally that. There's no more to it. I feel like I find the experience of being inside this body that I have very, very, it's fascinating, and I don't take it for granted. And I don't take for granted that my arms and my legs work and my body works so well. I don't take that for granted at all, and I view it as an extreme privilege to have a functioning body that I can use. And I never take that for granted at all. And so every time I make a piece of work with my body, it is both a declaration of intent, and it's a taking up of space in that particular place and time, and it's a declaration of intent is the best way I can put it. And the act of doing so for me is a statement in itself, a statement of my presence, a statement of intent, and it's also a kind of it's almost like a dog pissing on the corner, Alan. Not to put too fine a point on it. It's like,
very Irish.
I'm here, I'm taking up this space, and I'm going to do this action. So to delve into what is it about repetition, I'm endlessly interested, and I have yet to be satiated in my curiosity around the experience of starting an action, repeating an action, experiencing how it feels to do so, for as long as you can continue doing it, and experiencing how it feels to stop, and the different spectrum of experiences you'll have within that time. I always learn more about myself and more about the action as I do so, whether it be flipping a tire up a hill for as many times as I can do it, until I can't do it anymore, or packing and unpacking a suitcase, so as to experience the action and to find it'll always give me something new. And I'm interested in, repetition is a very human thing. Going back to the analogy of the dogs, a dog will always turn itself around a few times before it settles in its bed for the night. When I was a fitness instructor, I would teach classes, and I would notice the repetition in human behavior that would present itself in front of you without asking for it. People would come in, they would decide very quickly, within a second or two, where they were going to place themselves in the room. Would they come into the front row where all the eager beavers are? Would they stay in the middle, i.e. middle of the road? Would they go to the back because they don't want anyone to see them? Where would they place themselves? Do they want to be on the sideline so they can make a quick exit? All of these things, you'd clock them deciding very quickly. And then I would be able to bet money with you that they would occupy the same space as often as possible every week from there on. People don't like to be, people like to form habits and keep them and repeat the same things over and over. And I would, in my own small anarchic way, I would try and piss them off by, for instance, I'd wait till everyone had taken their place in the room, and then I'd go to the back of the room so the people at the back were now at the front, and completely disrupt everyone's intended position. Just so I think repetition is a human thing. It's also an act of comfort. Repetition is enormously comforting for a lot of people. For me, I like to see how the repetition changes within itself as you repeat it, if that makes any sense. And it's an ongoing feature for me for that reason, if that's an answer.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very, very good answer indeed. And there's so much information in there to unpack and just digest.
Good one.
It sounds very Lacanian in terms of disrupting the pattern of behaviour in terms of going to the back of the audience. I think it's like what the audience expects, and they settle into that thinking that they're in control of the performance of the event. And you kind of disrupt it and turn it upside down by going to the back of the room. So it kind of it will reawaken the person into some kind of different consciousness to the one that they had, they thought they were in control of, and it probably retunes their senses and everything in terms
Completely.
of upsetting the apple cart. I think it's interesting, the whole nature of performance with the relationship, with the audience, and just the psychology and in terms of the expectation, what can actually happen within the performance. It's quite interesting how you outlined the process in terms of it's the start of the performance, and there's an end of the performance, and then there's a start point and there's an end point, and everything that happens within that, you're not quite sure exactly what's going to happen, and that's a performance. So it's very, very, very interesting. I think you've kind of mentioned working with a lot of people and being finding your way into the Irish contemporary art scene, and the visual arts, and I'm always impressed how hard you work. I'm impressed by two things. I'm impressed by how you can describe your practice without using lots of buzzwords, flowery language, art speak, and actually be honest about it, and just actually actually describe it, which is great for the outsider, because I think in terms of involvement, engagement, with audience, probably I do feel sometimes the art world has reached the point where the public is just fatigued with the games that artists do play with the public in terms of meaning and being kind of not being able to understand. So it's one thing that I've always liked about your writing and your explanations. It is easy to understand, but maintaining the complexity of the interaction. But what I would like to ask is, you've been making a lot of work and over the last few years and all through lockdown, and I'd just like to ask if lockdown affected your practice in any way.
Oh yeah, I mean, 100%. I mean, lockdown, when lockdown started, we weren't long out of, I don't think were we 6 months graduated or so?
Yep.
We weren't that long. And I was happy at the time because I had gotten, I had, as I always do, I had put proposals in for a certain amount of open calls and festivals and various happenings that were happening in the future, and I had secured a number of these, so I was feeling good about my upcoming schedule. Then lockdown happened, and all of those were either indefinitely postponed or just cancelled outright. And I was left, like most people in the creative world, with no work at all. So I had no work, and I had nothing coming up, and I had nothing to plan for. Again, I stress, like the majority of people in the creative world who were all the same. So it was by no means just an issue that I was facing. And I decided, so I kept myself super busy all the way through lockdown, which is the only way I can, the only way I can be calm is if I'm really busy, because it helps me be calm. I can't be calm if I have nothing on. So I will always go and create things if there's nothing happening, so as I have something to focus on. So I decided I would do something based around my kids initially, because there are a lot of these sort of kid-based initiatives sprung up at the beginning of lockdown. At the beginning, I think, of lockdown, everyone was, okay, let's do this, let's do that, let's create this thing, let's keep super busy. And before we entered into a sort of slightly more prolonged period of inertia, I think when it all began to hit us that this wasn't going away anytime soon. But that initial phase was a flurry of activity, and I ended up making. I put together an art competition for kids based in County Clare, and I did that because my youngest kid had wanted to enter a competition. Something that was in the paper, and he couldn't do it because he was too young. So he was. So I decided, right, I'll do a competition. So as usual, it grew legs and got much bigger than I'd intended, and hundreds and hundreds of kids entered, and I got some decent sponsorships for it, and it turned out to be a lovely, engaging project that really helped keep me grounded, because I was getting all this engagement and communication from kids all over Clare, a county which I didn't know that well either. I didn't know half the places these people were contacting me from, and they were sending in the most amazing work. So I was seeing all these pockets of, I was having all these glimpses into other people's lives based around the county, mostly rural places I'd never been to or heard of in Clare. I am not afraid to say. And learning about and seeing lives from the kids' point of view and what they could see, and they draw a picture of their garden, or they draw a picture of their cat, or they draw a picture of their kitchen table. So it was like seeing all these little glimpses into other people's worlds, and it was incredibly interesting, actually. And I learned a lot through that project, and I ended up curating that project into a full exhibition for the local Arts Council funded gallery here in Clare, Glore, which is an excellent gallery space and theatre. And they, in fairness to them, took on the whole project and showed it as a proper gallery show in their in their venue for 2 months, which was a really cool experience, and it was lovely to see the project grow into an actual proper, from an idea I had happening mostly on my laptop and kids sending me their drawings, to a fully fledged proper show, which I got to curate, which was really nice. And also I continued making my own work throughout lockdown, and I made a couple of performance to camera pieces which were shown in this gallery, which I submitted work for, and was lucky enough to be able to show within a couple of exhibitions they had on, which was an online gallery. And again, that was the only way work could be shown at the time. It already feels strange talking about it in the past tense. And it became the way that people could do call outs, show work, and that artists could make work for. So yeah, I made 2 different pieces. Both of them were based around my inability to go anywhere. Like a lot of people, I had no choice but to sit up and take notice of my surroundings, and the work that I made was very strongly influenced by what was around me, and what I was seeing every day was existing in the same space, and in going for walks to the same place, doing the same things each day, in and out, and the days becoming very much one like the other to a strong extent. And that came through very much in the work. I was very lucky to, in 2020, Belfast Gallery PS Squared got in touch and asked me would I participate in a drawing show. And I made a piece of work basically exactly about what I just explained, which was the fact that the days felt like one long day, every day felt the same, and the work it was a celebration really of lockdown, and the time I was spending, this concentrated time with my kids, and walking along and looking at the same hedgerows and listening to the same kind of conversations happening in my house day in, day out. And the work was a literal expression of those subjects, and it was a lovely thing to be able to make, and to be able to sort of make a very honest piece of work about what was going on in your life at that time, with no delusions of any grandeur, I can assure you, you know. So yeah, I was lucky. When we were coming out of lockdown, I found that I was as busy as you know, I kept pretty busy during lockdown, and either created or was lucky enough to get selected for work, which meant that I was pretty much working to full capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, I think excuse me. I think I personally, during lockdown, I felt quite rudderless. I felt like I was a bit directionless, and I think a lot of other people felt the same way. We didn't know what to do. You know, all of a sudden everything's cancelled. What should we do? But I think personally, following your work on Instagram and actually just seeing, you know, your efforts to actually, you know, keep going through this when things were cancelled and you couldn't do site visits, or, you know, you're confined geographically, and actually making positive things happen from all the negativity that was surrounding it. I don't know how you did it, but I do take my invisible hat off to you and doff it. And I think it was amazing. You know, you seem to manage to, you know, just pull rabbits out the hat, and it just demonstrates the strength and determination of an artist. In terms of process,
well, I'll just interject and say there, that's nice of you to say, but I would just interject briefly and say that my life, apart from my kids being home from school, my life didn't change that much, because I had spent the 3 years previously doing a remote-based master's, working yes, I was working as well as doing that master's on various projects, which allowed me to go out and meet people and go to venues and places in my freelance capacity as an artist. But when lockdown happened, I was used to working remotely. I was used to not seeing many people. I was used to all of those things that a lot of people had to make huge adjustments around. A lot of people had never worked from home, weren't used to the same routine every day. A lot of the repetition and the kind of the task-based daily onerous kind of task-based repetition of lockdown, I was used to all that. So to me, maybe that was advantageous for me, because I was already well versed in isolation and being by myself and making work purely by thinking it up and just going ahead and making it happen yourself, and not relying on a cohort, on a collective, to not being inspired by others. I was well used to doing it by myself. So in a way, it wasn't that different from what I was used to. So I think it's only fair to mention that,
Yeah, no, it's definitely interesting. And, this section of the discussion is, what we're looking at, the artist practice, themes, methodology, influences. And every artist, is different in terms of their approach, so some artists might be going further afield, have things internationally that they had to cancel. And some people might be working more locally, or just, used to working, personally, I just went to the studio all the time. And but I think we all handled it differently. But I think, I just think I personally was really impressed with your output, in terms of you managed to convert, thinking or, ideas, like you said, into an actual output, that engaged with others. Just one final question, Rachel, on on your practice in terms of on the process and developing ideas. Do you have a set methodology for this, and how does this work, and do you think it differs from other fields such as sculpture and painting in terms of a workflow methodology for performance? We talked about logistics, and it can be difficult, and is there a lot of planning involved, and budgets, and you actually have to
Yes, there is.
Yeah.
There would be, and I really like that you asked that question, genuinely, because I think that the general nature of like performance is an ephemeral entity. It when you're finished, it's gone. If you've decided you wanted, the whole documentation of performance, that's almost another conversation in itself, because it remains quite a contentious subject. I find that most performance artists have a strong opinion on, how work should be documented, if work should be documented, and the nature of how the documentation should be carried out, if it is to be. So, going back to the initial question, I suppose what I'm saying is, if a tree falls in the woods and you're not there to see it, did it even happen? So yes, performance is documented so that people can prove it happened. Because if you don't, all this work that you have, and time and effort that you have expended to make this piece of work, may not be seen by many people. That's okay if that's your intention. But yes, to answer your question, I put a large amount of work and time into making performances happen. I'll give you an example of one that I made recently for there was a 3-artist residency that I completed 3 weeks ago with Catalyst Arts in Belfast, and the name of the residency was OGHAM, OGHAM, which is the word for a style of ancient Neolithic writing. And was there was 2 other artists involved, Brian Keelt and Stephanie Tanney and myself, and it was a wonderful experience working on the residency, and it was curated by Jen Alexander, and we Jen asked me would I was kind of working on a remote basis from Clare, and I travelled up and down to Catalyst a couple of times during the residency, and I came up for the end of the residency, and I marked the closing of our show in Catalyst with a performance, and the name of the performance was "This Is Not the End," and the performance was a response to the work we'd made, and a response, a kind of a number of, let me see how to describe it. This is the thing when you're describing work, but to answer your question, I had no physical space in which to rehearse, if you want to call it that, my plan for the performance. I was lucky enough to be able to secure a space to work within in my local gallery again, which is called Glore. And Glore have been very good to me in that they have allowed me several times to come in and access their studio space to use it as a performance planning venue, and to work in a secure place where I can roll around or jump or shout or do whatever I have to do in the privacy of a studio space. I have a small studio of my own, but it's literally not big enough to move around in very much physically. So I would have made 2 trips to Glore to spend time working out a protocol for my performance. I would have written extensively in preparation for the performance, and I would have spent a number of hours as well as that in sort of going through mentally how I was going to approach the piece of work as well. So there is a considerable time that I personally spend working on the preparation alone for the performance, that I have to work out what I'm going to do, how I'm going to do it.
Yep. That's.
Are we gone? Are you
no,
back?
no. Yeah, I'm still here, Rachel.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not sure whose phone that was. I apologize.
We're still,
just repeat what I just said.
Yeah. We heard that's absolutely fascinating in terms of you know, a kind of rough outline of you know, the way that, you know, we as an artist, you approach, you know, the process. Like you say, it can be a different process in terms of you know,
it's
developing
very much so. And it's also, just to add as well, I mentioned about documentation at the beginning of that conversation, and I'm not going to go into it now because that's a whole separate subject. But you can't worry about the documentation. Like if I'm making the work and I'm the one making the performance work, well, my job is to make that piece of work. Unless I've asked someone specifically to document performance in some nature, otherwise, how anyone chooses to document it, if they should so do. Like now, all you'll see is people with their phone out filming you if you make a performance.
Yep.
Because they get to experience it in a different way, but that's not for me to decide. That's their choice how they wish to view it, you know. And if they choose to use that film as documentation, I can't control how they choose to film it. I can't control how the performance looks, and you have to let go of all that. Mm-hmm. It's like if you make a painting and then somebody else photographs it in a way that you don't like.
Yep.
It's not for you to dictate how they choose to document your work, if you know what I mean. You've put it out there. Your ownership over the work. As soon as you make it, and as soon as you hang a piece on a wall or make a performance, your ownership of that changes slightly, in my opinion. And you have to release it to a degree and allow others to interpret it in as whatever way as they should choose.
Yeah, I do. I do recall. Seeing there was an American artist, Gordon Matta Clark, who kind of cut buildings in half, and so you actually had to go and see the building. You know, I think they're usually like scheduled for demolition, so you actually had to go and see the building. And I saw an exhibition of his photographs of those buildings in the CCA in Glasgow a long time ago. But it's like the same thing. It's like I didn't actually get to see the building, the physicality of it, and actually be there at the site and experience it, or even see them cutting it, because I think people would watch them cutting it and doing it. But what I saw was the documentation, So
Yes.
it's just like, the difference, between actual, and that's the thing about performance that is like, a live event. It's that thing, and then you have the documentation, and they're just not going to be the same thing,
No,
same experience.
They're not. They're 100% they're not. But nor should, like, I don't. I mean, I know I've read about a number of artists who completely do not want they don't even regard filmed performance as performance. And they think that only live performance is only the event itself is the performance. I just feel like you can't be too precious about those things, because number one, if you look at what we've just been through with COVID and lockdown, if you're going to dictate that only the actual live event is the piece that's worth watching, and anything after that is you're limiting yourself, and you're limiting who can see your work. It's like saying any photographs of my paintings are invalid and not to be in any way seen as my own work. Who's going to see your work then? If people seeing your work is something you want, personally, I think that making documenting performance allows it to be seen by probably 100% more people than would see it. It also democratizes it to a degree that would never happen if it wasn't the case where people were sharing your work, and when filming and sharing your work. Because talking about what you mentioned about the discourse of art, who goes to see your performances? Other artists and friends and interested parties who've heard of you, maybe, if you're lucky and want to come and see your work. If they should so choose to record or take pictures of what you're doing and share their experience, they're opening up your work to an audience that you could never do, because you don't know the people they know, and so on and so forth. So I am privileged and grateful when people share my work, to be perfectly honest. That is how I look at it. And I appreciate people taking the time to even do such a thing, because otherwise your work is going to stay within a very small circle, and your opportunity for others to find out about you remains limited. I also do enjoy as I said, the democratization of art through social media, and it allows an audience who would never see it to otherwise see it. So for that reason, I have no problem with it. Yes, you can't control how people choose to document it, but at the end of the day, I think if I'm lucky enough to be around in 20 years, I'm not going to care that much about that. So that's kind of how I look at it. I spend enormous time and energy creating, thinking, conceptualizing, and putting together a performance art piece. I have a extremely high standard of what I consider to be good work. I won't make work that's less than that. If someone chooses to share something I've made, I've already spent so much time putting that together that I'm pretty sure that I'll be happy enough for it to be reshared in a way that's out of my control. If that makes any sense, Alan.
Yeah, definitely. It all makes perfect sense. And it's a fascinating subject, documentation, social media, in terms of the work, I think we have a natural, a nice segue into actual talking about, some of the works that you have made. In terms of the next area for discussion, we can move on from the process and talk about actual, individual works. And the first work that comes to mind that I would like to ask about is that actually it kind of like it kind of overlaps into what we're just talking about in terms of filming and recording and documentation. And it's a piece of work that you did in 2019 called Night Crawl. And you did a crawl on all fours through a place called Ennis, and it was at night time. It was in October. It was a Friday night, was it? I think. And I think the pubs were all full. The pubs were coming out, and there was people, live people. So it had the potential to be volatile. It had the potential. I think there was. Now I actually wasn't there. Okay, you know that. I know that I wasn't there. Mm-hmm. My experience of this performance is actually through the video, watching it, and I got to say that every time I watch it, I do feel like I am there. I do experience it, the intensity of it. To me, it's like it has this intensity of life or death. It's like it just. It's like it has me sitting on the edge of the chair. It has this energy, and that's actually just watching the video. I think the word immersive is overused so much, but I think in this context, it's actually very immersive. And it's all. I think it's all. It's and there's good cinematography in there from your working partner, Paul, who we'll discuss later on. But I'll just like you to ask you to. Just to describe, Nightcrawl, the idea of it, and how it came to fruition, and your feelings when you were, doing the performance, and the kind of whether you think it was a success in terms of the people who actually experienced it, who were there. It's a bit like experiencing maybe as a live event, but also for people like me who just experienced it through the video. It works in both contexts.
Yeah, it was before COVID, which is to be noted, as you said, because it was a different climate. Because the pubs were full of people, and I very much knew they would be. And I scheduled the performance. I scheduled it to begin at 11:45, and I was hoping it would finish in and around like 20 past, 12:30, so as to experience whether the atmosphere would change with night becoming day, essentially, PM changing to AM. So that was one of the reasons why we scheduled it at that time. And when it's important to note that 2019, we had graduated the summer just before, and the performance was in October. And I was making forays into the art world myself at that point, having just finished the intense time of our graduation. I was kind of going out blind into the ether, because I didn't really know. I just had this compulsion to do this action, and I advertised it myself. I had nobody working on my behalf to make it happen. I didn't even know how to. I mean, I still don't think it's something that you would go to a gallery and go, "Come here, will you sponsor me, because I want to crawl through my small West of Ireland town at midnight just to see what happens," So like a lot of these things, I said, well, I'll just go do it myself, because I can't wait to have someone else ask me to do this. So I'm just going to go get it done. So I scheduled the event, and being the proper middle-class citizen that I am, I wrote to the Garda, the guards in Ireland are the police. I wrote to the guards and informed them of my intent to make this action, and let them know that I'd be doing it just in case they would be wondering what was going on of a Saturday night. It was a Saturday night. I digress. It wasn't a Friday night. It was a Saturday night. Because Saturday night was significant.
My bad.
Because Saturday night is the big night everyone goes out on. No worries. So I informed them of my intention to do this, and typically I got no response from them. So I was like, I don't know whether, So I said, look, I emailed them one more time and just reminded them of what I was doing, because I am quite by the book that way. I was like, if I'm going to do it, I'm going to let the right people know, so as they can't turn around and claim I was being a public interference on any level, because at least I did actually tell them that I was doing it. So Ennis has a population of, oh gosh, I don't know. It's a very much of a growing population. It's near Shannon Town, of which the famous Shannon Airport is, and it's an old market town, and it's got a strong town population. There'd be anything from at least 15 pubs to 20 pubs in the vicinity of the two streets I crawled up and down. And it was a nice evening. It turned out to be a nice evening, and it was a clear evening. It wasn't raining, which is notable in Ireland. So it was a busy night. So that's the scene I'm just setting, first of all. I had decided I wanted to do this because the main reason I ever do anything, I wanted to see what it would be like to do it. So that was my main reason. And I feel like that's a valid reason to do anything if it's not going to be unsafe for anyone involved. That's safe. Health and safety is always has to be adhered to. Also, the action of crawling, I'm very interested in the action of crawling because of the connotations the action has. It can be interpreted in a manifold, in many ways. There's the association of humbleness, or being close to the ground, or needing shelter, or sheltering, because you have to crawl because you don't want to be seen, so you stay down low. You could be someone who is, anything. It brings to mind the idea of a military person who's crawling on a reconnaissance mission, or it could be someone who has drunk so much they can't walk, so they're crawling. It could be someone who's crawling in an act of, prayer or humbleness. It could be someone who is crawling in a sexually suggestive way in a music video. It could be my daughter, who at the time would crawl a lot in our home, because if she didn't have her walker, she would crawl because she wouldn't be able to walk upright unsupported. So her action of crawling would arouse such mixed feelings in me when I would see her crawl. But for her, it was a perfectly functional movement because it got her from A to B. So it made perfect sense for her to crawl. And I was always interested in how her crawling would instigate such a strong reaction in me, when for her it was just a functional movement. And this juxtaposition of functionality against the semiotics of crawling, I found really interesting. So it was in part sort of a private homage to my kid, this crawling action, and very much me knowing full well that it would be bound to elicit some type of a response from anyone who might see it. And I wanted to see what the energy would be like to do such an action at such a time in a relatively intimate space, because there's not that many people. It's not like we're not going to be 5,000. So I might have come across, I don't know, maybe 100 to 200 people that night. So I had a number of people who volunteered to walk along nearby me just for safety reasons, because I really had no idea what it would be like. And I had my photographer collaborator, Paul, who was filming the event for me as well. And I chose to film the event also significantly. I wore a head cam, and I wore a balaclava. And the reason I wore a balaclava was because I didn't want to be recognizable, not because I didn't want anyone to know who I was, but because I thought it might color the proceedings if I was recognizable, particularly if I was instantly recognizable as a woman. I would be more recognizable, and I didn't want that to color how people would perceive the event. I was hoping to remain somewhat androgynous to a degree. So I wore like red trousers and a red top and a balaclava so as to not be instantly recognizable as female. I'm not sure how successful that was, but so yeah, that's why I did it, and it was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, absolutely amazing. Yeah, and we shall move on from 2019 into a work that you made in lockdown. I think you made the original one in. It's called Keep Smiling. And I think you made the original one in 2020, and then you showed it again as a performance chop chop at Fix 21 in 2021. So this is a very, very visually distinct performance piece, and I think your terminology uses performance to video, performance to camera. I think in the olden days we used to call it video performance, and now it seems it has a new, probably a more precise definition. To be honest, performance to camera. In this performance, you have like clearly makeup on your face, which looks like like a mask or something. To be honest, looking at it, it reminded me of I don't know if you know the Belgian painter James Ensor.
No, I don't.
He kind of was really fascinated by masks, and all his paintings. The people in them, had masks on, and there's a painting called The Intrigue from 1890 where it's just like a group of people and they're wearing masks. I think it's because he worked in his parents' shop, which sold masks, so that they had this sort of heavy influence on him. But the visuality of it, it reminds me of James Ensor's paintings, and also to a degree, the legendary classic mime artist Marcel Marceau.
Yes.
In terms of silent, performance and no words spoken, and you just have to read what's going on, rather there's no speech or anything. In terms of like what's actually happening in the video, I remember I was listening to Noam Chomsky talking once, and he was talking about cognitive dissonance, which seems to have filtered really these days into the mainstream, because it seems to happen a lot. And he described it as it's where you're saying one thing but thinking another thing. And I think the whole intrigue about your performance was based, somewhat around that. Can you just talk us through Keep Smiling? How it came about and the idea behind it.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I made it first as a sort of preparatory piece called Keep Smiling when I made a piece to camera, and I trialed the performance to camera and to see how it would feel to make it. So it comprises of me sitting behind a table with a bunch of onions. I think I had 2 bags of onions, so about 20 onions, maybe less, 15 to 20 onions, and a nice sharp knife and a chopping board. And in the performance to camera, I just have on have a black vest on, and I always have my head shaved anyway. The makeup you mentioned was I painted a classic smiley emoji onto my face, or as classic as I could make it. So I painted a yellow background and then painted on an emoji smile over my eyes and mouth. So that would set the scene visually for how the work would look. So when you view the performance camera, you just see a table, me sat behind the table, a chopping board, a knife, onions, and this face paint happening. So the performance comprises of me chopping the onions essentially for a period of time. And there are variations in terms of how the onions are chopped and the nature of how I go about this. So that is what it comprises of. The concept behind the work is I was interested in on a sort of a multi. If you were going to give it layers, the top layer is a very obvious. You talk about cognitive dissonance there and how you're doing one thing and saying another. Well, it's fairly a superficial and obvious layer there that, perhaps the person chopping onions would rather be doing something else, At the same time, I would be trying to indicate that there's a lot to be said for chopping onions, I quite enjoy chopping onions. I feel like that, it's a bit too simple to just dismiss the chopping onions as something that is a less than satisfactory action. I think if lockdown taught us anything, it's take pleasure in the small things. I like the contradiction of. A lot of people made the association that I was asked, are you rejecting domesticity with this action? I think that's too simple an answer, really. That you can't. That's like saying yes every time I make a cup of tea or I chop an onion, I feel angry. That's not really the case for me. But I suppose I was channeling a lot of. I was channeling a lot of feelings through my onion chopping. A lot of feelings were being channeled through those onions, and I think that was probably apparent. And each time I made that performance, I would have different feelings, and those feelings would come through the chopping action. So it's just to say that there was one particularly, that's for the audience to decide what they think might be being channeled through the chops. The makeup was about the fact that we, and I'm interested in the fact that a lot of people soften their communication with the addition of emojis. And I think that emojis are, in some ways, they've allowed us as a society to cop out, really. And I kind of despise them on a lot of levels. I think their general generic acceptability just annoys me. I just think they're so bland and annoying. And I thought, what's the most annoyingly bland thing I can put onto myself? So hence the smiley face. But it had this rather wonderful consequence of being quite menacing in some ways, which I hadn't thought would happen. And I feel like that was a combination of the general viciousness of the action, of the chopping, and the atmosphere in which the performance was made both times, even though the performance to camera was done during the day in a brightly lit studio. And the performances to cameras, the live performances, of which there were two, were done in an evening setting in a darker environment in front of a live audience. There was a slight insidious sort of nastiness about it, which I really liked, which helped me harness the energy that I was hoping for during the performance.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting, you mentioned the audience. Obviously, as artists, the audience, the public is, always really central to what we do. And myself as the audience, I think I had a little bit of a different interpretation from it. because of you chopping an onion. The onion was the substance, and the knife was the tool, the thing that activated the onion. Because we know that when you're chopping onions, it brings tears to your eyes. So had it been a different vegetable, it wouldn't have created this process of bringing tears to your eyes. And I thought that there was this fixed smile painted onto your face, but there was there was obviously something going on behind the scenes, and the chopping of the onion was like the metaphor, this for that some kind of activity where is the dissonance, and behind the smile, that's causing, you can see kind of tears. But I just thought it was like an interesting process, the connection all the way through from the eyes and the, like you say, the emoji, down to chopping the onion. And I think it's like an interesting performance because, as you say, the audience, everyone who watches it, will have their own interpretation, formulate their own reading of it. It's also an interesting performance as well because it's one that's is portable, and I'm sure that you'll do it again in the future somewhere, and it's like new audiences, and they'll but I think it's one of these performances that it's kind of born through like one thing, i.e. like things that were happening at a time, but it's something that will travel down through time and have a relevance for a long time. Move on to the next work that you made, which was Tide Map in 2021. Now you spent 6 hours from, I think it was it 4 a.m. when sunrise, the actual the timing of when sunrise was around that time, walking along a beach for 6 hours. It was a time-based work where you wore like a striking red dress, and you spent 6 hours walking along the kind of the point where the tide was, the water, and tracked it along until it actually reached high tide, I think. I was just like to know, was there a specific artist that influenced this work? And I would also be interested to know the kind of things that actually went through your mind during 6 hours, because 6 hours of doing this, something that can seem quite repetitive, but I can imagine it would have actually been quite really interesting because you're out in nature, and you have the stimulation and you have the noises and the environmental effects, but essentially you are still left alone with your own thoughts. You're the sole performer, and there's no real audience, but that you're in the middle of this performance and you're going through it. So I'd be interested to know what kind of things came to mind, and I'd also be interested in terms of if you could talk briefly about the relationship that you've formed with videographer Paul Corey, who did the videography for Nightcrawl, and in terms of how you handle the documentation for such a long piece, whether you hand the editing over to Paul or whether you actually have an interaction in terms of deciding, like we discussed earlier on, the documentation, how it's going to be edited for presentation.
Okay, that's a lot of questions. The Tide Map is one of 3 pieces. It's a triptych of site-specific durational public performances, which I conceptualized last year and have been lucky enough to receive Arts Council Agility Award funding to make. Now, the piece that you mentioned, Tide Map, that was a trial to have a go at the performance. And just to touch on briefly, I think something else that you have to bear in mind as a performance artist is that you can't be you know, I don't know any performance artist that relies on an audience to be the main motivation behind making work, because you can't, you know, like you could have 2 people at a performance, or you could have 50, or you could have 20 people there, and you could have another 100 people watching remotely, depending on the setup. Or you could, you know, or it could be something that nobody witnesses, and then through its documentation, it gains a following at a later date. My point being that you can't, like, a lot of the work that I started out making as a performance artist, I would just go and make in a public place, and anyone who would witness it was purely accidental. And again, alluding to Nightcrawl, I had an intentional audience who I'd invited to watch the performance via my live headcam that I recorded. I filmed the event and invited people to attend that live screening, which I put on social media so people could log in and watch it alongside me as I performed the work. Because I wanted to maintain an element of control over the proceedings. But I also asked my colleague Paul to film the event, and in afterwards, Paul then edited and made a short documentary film out of Nightcrawl, which we successfully submitted to a number of different film festivals afterwards. So there are different ways to document an event. The event that you mentioned most recently, i.e. Tide Map, there was nobody there for Tide Map. I had no audience for that. I decided that I would try the performance out. Anyone who I did advertise it and told people I would be doing it, but I knew full well there'd be nobody there. It was 4 a.m. in a very remote part of the west of Ireland. There's nobody going to be able to come and watch that. That was fine. I wanted to see, again, harking back to the reason why I do things, I wanted to see what it would be like to do it. I also wanted to see if I could do it. I was interested in how it would feel before, during, and after the event. If it was the case where I was successful in completing it. So I wanted to accompany the tide on its journey from full tide out to full tide in, and walk alongside the tide at the point where the water meets the sand. And I chose a specific beach that I hoped would be in size, not too big but not too small, which would allow me to actually do this within the time frame. That's why I picked a beach that was too big. There was no way I was going to be able to walk up and down the entire tide line. This particular beach I picked, it's called the Flaggy Shore, and it's quite a historically well-known beach because of the Flaggy Shore rocks, which are situated along the side of the beach. There's a small sandy inlet, and that was the venue for the performance. And I asked my collaborator Paul to film the event, and I asked his advice as to how we would go about filming an event that was going to last 6 hours long, a minimum of 6 hours, because his expertise would lie in the documentation. So he advised that we approach it through a process of doing almost like a stop motion film. So he organized his cameras to take a photograph every 7 seconds. And for the duration of the 6 hours, that's what he did. He had his camera set up so that it photographed the scene every 7 seconds. And it ended up being I was really taken with the results, because you watch the film and you see night become day, you see the tide crawl up the beach slowly. It's the most beautiful area of the country, and it's very visually appealing, and you just see glimpses of the artist me wearing a red outfit, traveling up the beach. But I mean, they're literally like a pinpoint, they're minuscule, and then as the film progresses, the figure gets slightly larger as the tide comes in and the tide approaches the camera. So it's a very gradual process of discovery as to what's going on, and all the while you're watching this meditative scene of this beautiful dawn unfolding in this part of the country. And that's the main event. The side event is this small red entity traveling up and down. But because of the way it's done in a stop motion, you literally get these glimpses up until the very end, when you get a few more shots of me walking, and you can see that it's a person. But what I had wanted was to see this to find a way to record the duration and to see the tide move. So this, in my opinion, was a successful way to record the event. We have to do it again. We're scheduling it again to happen this summer alongside the other two pieces which make up the triptych of works.
Absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I really look forward. I don't know if we can watch the actual film anywhere, or whether it's going to become, if pieces are going to become like a film in itself, but if that's at all possible, if it's going to be screened, I'd love to see that, and I really look forward to.
Yeah, I hope to screen the three pieces as a triptych.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
That's how I hope to screen them. And one more thing to add: it was freezing cold, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done by a huge long shot. Way harder than crawling up a street at midnight. Way harder than chopping onions. Way harder than any of our other performance pieces, because of the sustained energy required to keep going for 6 hours. It was 6.5 hours.
Okay.
And it was because I couldn't move fast, and I couldn't keep. I had to walk slowly because there was so many jellyfish on the beach, and my feet got cut and stung, and I had to stay in line with the tide, and I had to summon up a lot of mental discipline to keep going through the action for the 6.5 hours.
Yeah, it's interesting. So in terms of, like, it wasn't, you weren't, it sounds like you weren't having intellectualized, cognitive enlightenments about philosophical ideas while you're doing the walking. It was more, a primitive, maybe process of survival, against the elements and dodging jellyfish in the cold. And that's maybe the kind of things that, are crossing your mind, rather than, epiphanies and things. In terms of moving on, Rachel, to a couple of other works, you did mention at the start of our conversation that you had a show called Eggs and Butter in 2022. I'd just like to mention this because it encapsulates your drawing practice, which I do greatly admire in the work that you produced for this show. You are a very accomplished draftsperson, and you're not afraid to explore your ideas and push your drawings in different directions. The drawings are very, very unique drawings, and you draw on brown paper and also on plywood. I'd just like to know if there is any crossover, a connection between performance and drawing. Are they separate things? Or are you always working to try and draw them closer? One, works with the other one, or are they related?
Yeah, they are related. And I zigzag between them in some ways, as a respite from each other. Sometimes, if I've been working on a particularly encompassing performative project, drawing serves as a relief from that to a degree, but drawing has its own energies that you need to draw upon. So I suppose with drawing always teaches me about myself and other people, and I'm very interested in how I'm endlessly interested in people and how they move and how they take up space, and that is a strong component of my performance work, how we take up space in this world. So they do have those parallels, and I just draw as an observational, informative practice. It teaches me about my surroundings and my the subtleties of what you see every day around you. I'm very interested in that. So I do find myself, I do find that my drawing, my attitude to my drawing practice has changed somewhat in the last 5 years or so, since I began making performance work. Really, I suppose I started making performance kind of 7 years ago, really, and I'm less restrictive in my drawing now, and I view it as it's like visual note taking, like a lot of us who draw. That's what it's for, and I have strong feelings as well about the democracy of drawing, which you touched upon there. It's anti-elite drawing. Anyone can draw. You don't need expensive materials. You don't require a specific set of tools, other than something to make a mark with and something to make a mark on. That's all you need. You can do it if you're in prison. You can do it if you're elderly. You can do it if you're physically incapacitated in some way. You can do it anywhere also. And I love the versatility and the sort of democratic nature of drawing as a tool. And I like drawing on cardboard, and when I go shopping, I always save the rough brown paper that fruit is wrapped in, because I love the texture and the unruly nature of that surface to draw on. I recently completed an online drawing workshop for some children, a series of workshops, and I made them all go and collect recycled paper to draw on. And I did notice how their attitude to the idea of perfection changed as they began to work on this more accessible type of material. They didn't feel like they had to make perfect work, and all their styles changed, and that was very interesting to me. My need for perfection and my need for accuracy is somewhat stymied when I use this rough paper to draw on, because it doesn't allow you perfect control, and I find that process quite interesting as well. And I chose to use that brown paper for eggs and butter, which was I made a lot of drawings for, and the drawings I made were of women who I contacted through a social media call out, and asked for women who work in rural surrounds in the county of Clare if they would allow me to come and witness them and draw them as they went about their work. Yeah. And through the project, I met horticulturists, gardeners. I met farmers as well. Those were the three main groups of women who I met, all of whom were working professionally in those areas. And it was enormously interesting for me to do that and to meet these incredible, tough women who are used to physical hard work and are used to, in a similar way to what I used to do as a fitness instructor, they would have to show up on the good days and the bad days because the work had to be done regardless of the weather or how they were feeling. And for that reason, they've all developed a mental and physical level of endurance, which I find admirable. And their workplaces were beautiful places. That was kind of consequential. That wasn't really something I looked forward to. They just happened to be beautiful places, and the environments which they worked in, the countryside. So I would draw them in their workplace in the countryside working. And the show, the work that I contributed to the show was a series of drawings of these women in their places of work, working, in the act of working in their places of work. And the premise of the show, by the way, was eggs and butter. The curator of the show, her concept was she wanted the artists in the show to make reference to the methodology used by women in rural Ireland in the past, when they would sell eggs and butter either by the side of the road or at markets in order to make extra money for the family. These were resources they had to hand for farm or rural based women, so they would use what they had to hand, i.e. eggs and butter, to sell. And she wanted sort of a contemporary take on that idea for the show. And I had no connection to it initially. It didn't appeal to me. I didn't feel drawn to it. And then she encouraged me to literally make my own response in any which way I felt would be appropriate. And my response was to go and seek out women who are contemporary versions of this. And that's how it grew for me. And it was an enormously rewarding project to work on. And I got to meet really interesting people. So that was also a plus.
Yeah, absolutely fascinating. Personally, I'm a big fan of, projects that, can draw on heritage and history. And I like the idea that you used the brown paper, because, I can kind of remember going into shops with my mum when I was a kid, and she, they used to order the bacon, the eggs, and the butter, and it was, a pat of butter, and it was wrapped in the brown paper, so it's like I didn't kind of initially realise, the tie-in, but the actual materials, the drawing materials, ties in with the theme. Just to quickly touch on the exhibition that we mentioned, Ad Spatium in Sweden, where you actually did like a drawing on the floor, using charcoal. That kind of, to me, that sort of like, moves your work in a new direction, where you actually are fusing drawing and performance into one, and doing it together. So I'm just wondering if you're going to explore that more in the future, actually.
Yeah, it was a new foray, you're right. And I got a good piece of advice once from a performance artist friend who mentioned, that in their own practice, they always try to take an element of their previous performance practice history and bring it forward into the most recent performance. So take an element from before and keep it with you as you move forward. I realized I'd been doing that unconsciously. I think a lot of us do that in our own practices anyway. Because I'm always looking for new ideas and allowing myself to try new ideas out. I move through different ideas quite quickly, I think more so than other artists, and everyone moves at a different pace, and that's by no way a judgment on anyone, because everyone's different and we all process our ideas at a different speed. For me, I think maybe it's to my detriment sometimes. I move very fast through ideas. However, I had decided I wanted to try a new foray for the performance in Gävle, which is how you pronounce Gavle, which I learned whilst being there. It's actually Gävle. I was also saying Gavle until I got there, and then I was politely corrected by the Swedish people who I met. It's actually Gävle. So Gävle in Sweden. And I wanted to make a conceptual physical drawing performance, and I wanted to have a relationship with the charcoal. I deliberately chose strengthened charcoal to use on the floor, and we affixed rolls of white cartridge paper to the floor to make us wide, as large a space as we could for me to use as canvas. And I wore a white top and trousers so as to see what would happen to them as the performance progressed, with the charcoal on the white ground. And as the event was covered by a local journalist who covered the event, and they described it as in a lovely Swedish way, which I really enjoyed. I think his words were, her dress becomes it was a trousers, but nonetheless her dress becomes the canvas through her use of charcoal also. So basically I got covered in charcoal, which I had thought might happen, but not to the degree of which it did. To the same extent the canvas was. And it was a really exhausting but fulfilling piece of work. I think it lasted about 50 minutes. And I am interested in exploring it further. I had intended it to be, I suppose, an abstract performative piece, but it ended up not really being so. And that's another element of performance where you can prepare all you like, and then on the day in a public, durational, responsive piece of work, it never quite goes the way you think it will. So you're best to allow some room for different happenings to occur, or different directions to come about. I do recall having charcoal, literally picking charcoal out of my fingers for days afterwards, and having charcoal behind my ears and all sorts for a while afterwards. But it was it was a really, I got a very interesting multiple series of responses from the Swedish audience who were kind enough to come along and watch the event that evening. Like that, everyone had a different interpretation of the performance.
Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. Really interesting. It's something. I guess if you haven't done it yourself, it must be, difficult to actually imagine the experience of actually being the performer, in that zone, in that place. Rachel, I'd like to just quickly move on to just the final kind of question that I have about your some of your work. Obviously, we've not covered all of your work. We don't have the time, but you do a lot of work in terms of working in the community and engaging with the community, as you've touched on quite a lot throughout the discussion. For example, County Clare schools and community centres, the kids' art competition, creating murals, and the most recently the large installation, Hidden Truths Behind Closed Doors, which was a multimedia art installation on behalf of Clare Haven Domestic Abuse Services, where the installation comprised of 11 rooms, each exploring a different element of contemporary domestic abuse in Ireland. It was interesting right to the start of the discussion where we were talking, and you said that you venture into things because you kind of you didn't know, like, oh, this is like, if you went into a library and there were a big bookshelf saying performance art, and then next to it there'd be a big bookshelf saying community art. I think the days of old, certainly from the place, my neck of the woods, it's like, people went off and did community art, and that's kind of what they did. And the people would do fine art, and then they'd do that. But I like the way that you're not frightened, to do these things, and you don't consider it yourself to be like, to be things like that out of your remit or out of your scope, because you're doing X, Y, so you can't do Z. I'd just like if you could tell us a bit about some of the exhibitions, and in terms of it's something that you're going to keep doing in the future, or will it be, if your performance, drawing starts to become bigger and you get into it more, would you focus it on that?
Well, I feel like I'm only getting started with performance work. I feel like I'm only starting to dip my feet into the shallow end of the pool as such. I have, if I'm ever fortunate enough to actually materialize all the ideas, I'll be lucky when it comes to performance, because I do genuinely feel like I'm only starting, and it's a funny. I was sort of sharing a joke with the other two artists who worked with me on the residency I mentioned, in the OM residency in Catalyst Arts, which finished recently, because the curator approached us because of she felt we had a common thread between us, which you could call, for want of a better word, mature emerging would be the label she was giving us. And we were joking about this idea of all being mature and also emerging, and the whole way the art world likes to label people as mid-career, late career, emerging, and what does that actually mean? What does emerging mean? When do you stop emerging? And when are you mid-career? At what point? Who decides what? You know, we were joking about this, and because technically, I suppose if you were going to give me a label, I would still be in the emerging category, really, because just lockdown kind of meant that all of our careers were frozen to a degree for a period of time, and we're all emerging now. I do have a healthy dislike of those labels. I think most of us do. But I am a mature artist. I mean, I'm 47 now. I mean, in some ways I'm not, because I'm only 47, but in other ways I am, because I'm not 20. Do you know what I mean? And I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now, I think, if I was in my early 20s, because I wouldn't know myself well enough to be secure in my decision making about what I want to do. And I feel like, you know, I would like to be making performance work for as long as I can. I have a lot more work to make. So it is literally, I'm only touching my feet in the water when it comes to what I hope to make with performance. That is definitely true. The community work, you're right, I don't box myself in, but as the aforementioned Anya Phillips said to me, she was kind enough to do some mentoring with me during lockdown. And she said, "You're never going to get rich from performance. We're not all Marina Abramovich." And I just loved that, because she's so right and practical. And, you know, you can't, performance art may not be the best way to pay all one's bills, you know, not at the stage I'm at anyway. You need to be, I'm not afraid to try other facets of art, and I always learn from it. And also it helps me meet people, because I end up being quite isolated sometimes in my work. Working in the community allows you to meet people, and it allows you to keep that human connection, which I value and appreciate. And it is good. Collaborative art forces you to compromise, and that's not always a bad thing. You don't want to get to a point where you're unable to compromise anymore, because the world demands compromise, as you know well. So I find that I find also that working with children, which I don't do that much work with kids, but I do a couple of projects every year with kids. And kids don't lie. Kids tell you the truth. Kids do not edit their words. If they don't like something, they will tell you. If you show them a piece of work you made, they'll tell you what they think. So it's a very valuable type of feedback, I can tell you. In my opinion, anyway, you'll get an unfiltered response from children. And for that reason, you know, it's to me, it's valuable. So I'll keep on doing community work, and I will try to grow my performance career considerably more if possible. But I won't box myself in. And I think you're right that those days of sort of categorizing ourselves into community art or conceptual art, you know, there's not a need for that anymore as such. And I think we're able to dip our feet into different waters without causing anyone to doubt our commitment to our practice, you know.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very pragmatic approach that you have. One foot in, you know, the art world, and you know, and also one foot, you know, firmly in reality and grounded. And it's very pragmatic, and it's true. We, you know, this is 2022. We all have a more fluid approach and diversification. Yeah, definitely, it's really, really interesting. You know, thinking how things have changed, how things have moved on. I have certainly learned a massive amount just through this, you know, discussion that we've had, Rachel. And I'm saying that, and I'm being really honest, completely honest. It's you know, because I just feel like, you know, I really these days I kind of come from some kind of old school, you know, and it's just you know, it's really enlightening. The last kind of question actually that I just have to ask you, and this might not be easy to answer. You don't have to answer it if you don't want to. I hate to put you on the spot, but the last question that I'd like to ask is there a particular work that you think is your strongest piece, perhaps a work that you like the most out of all your
No, there's not, but there are several. I'll just pick one. No, there's not a particular one that I think is my strongest, because it's hard to categorize them, because at the time of each one, you can't level the intensity, because the intensity is always there's never a performance I have made that I don't feel like sort of laughing and crying and drinking 3 bottles of wine afterwards, because I'm so mentally and physically exhausted. I think most performance artists will tell you the same, though. Every performance is really a really intense experience for me. In terms of which one I think is the strongest piece, if we're talking about performance, I recently made a piece for the closing of the Ohm show, and it was a very honest piece of work, and it was more abstract perhaps than some of the other pieces I've made, and I was a little more nervous about it for that reason. And the piece was called "This Is Not the End," and in the piece I performed a series of repetitive actions in the alleyway outside Catalyst Arts Gallery. So it was a public performance, and there were people passing by regularly, as well as an audience inside the gallery watching me outside the gallery. So we subverted the normal place where you might have people looking in the window at the artist or the art, whereas we had the people in the gallery looking out at me, who was outside the gallery performing. And I wanted to allow there be a potential interaction with an unintentional audience, that being passers-by, which did happen, and as well as the intentional audience of the people who were there. So that was when I say strong, I certainly was. It affected me deeply making that piece of work, and I found it quite hard to make, also very rewarding. In terms of non-performance, the Clare Haven domestic abuse installation, I got a lot of feedback from the public about that, which was a team effort, I may add. It wasn't just me who worked on that installation, it was a team of us. But we all received a lot of feedback from people who came to see the installation, who were profoundly affected by it. Domestic abuse victims and family and friends of domestic abuse victims, people who work within the field of domestic abuse services, police. We had a huge spectrum of people responding to the show who said they had been profoundly affected by the contents of the show. So I know for a fact that it was successful as such, in that people responded very strongly to it. So that was a rewarding experience, to know that it had been a useful. It's nice when your art is also useful, and that's not a word that I always attribute to my work, because I don't consider that it has to be useful, and it doesn't need to always be useful. In this case, it was useful, and it turned out to be a nice thing,
Yeah, definitely. You should be very proud of that work, and if that art can heal wounds and help people, then definitely. I think as artists sometimes we want it, to be helpful, and it's finding ways. And I have a strong respect for working with the community, and it's a most noble thing, and it's interesting, like you say, it's very, very rewarding. We'd all like to do more of that, and there should definitely be more such projects. So on that note, Rachel Macmanus, I would like to draw this discussion today to a close, and I wish you continuing success with your work and all the best for the future.
Thank you.
I look forward to...
Same to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Thanks. We shall struggle on and get to where we're going and enjoy the journey at the same time. And I'll definitely look forward to following your work on social media, seeing what you're up to, and hopefully at some point we can meet up again in the future. It's been an absolutely fantastic discussion, and I genuinely have learned a lot about the fascinating, art that's going on across the water in that direction over an island.
Yeah.
From where I'm sitting here. So thank you, Rachel Macmanus.
Thanks for having me, Alan. It was an absolute pleasure. It was great to talk to you and to see you again. And likewise, I wish you all the success, and I hope to see you soon in the flesh.
Yep, brilliant. Okay, thanks, Rach. See you then. Bye.
You're welcome. Bye now. Bye.